Hello and welcome to this edition of Reporters, the show that brings you our best stories from France 24's reporters around the world. This week we take you to a city at the crossroads of Russian and Jewish history. Biробиджане lies 6,000 kilometres southeast of Moscow, where Siberia meets the Far East. Nearly a century ago it was a forgotten outpost of the Soviet Union until Stalin relegated the country's Jews there. Biробиджане became a Jewish homeland years before the creation of Israel. Well, decades later, this homeland still exists. France 24's Stanислав descent Ippolit and Johan Budin travelled to this intriguing corner of Russia.
The Trans-Siberian, one of the world's most famous railway routes. 9,000 kilometres of track running from Moscow to the Pacific at Vladivostok. In recent years, the line's become a popular tourist attraction, but for locals in this isolated corner of Russia, it remains a vital link to the outside world. Olga Friedman's on her way back from a hairdressing course in Vladivostok. 50 years ago, her grandmother also boarded the train to flee the Nazis. She headed to Russia from Poland after hearing about a safe haven for Jews in the country's Far East, the region of Biробиджане.
This is the extreme east. Israel, that's the nearest. Biробиджане is the far east. We're a long way from Moscow. I don't know how many kilometers, but the train takes 7 days.
After 3 generations, the Friedmans have put down roots in this autonomous Jewish region. The capital, also called Biробиджане, is a little stop on the Trans-Siberian, home to 80,000 of the region's 200,000 people. The station signs are in Russian and Hebrew, and Jewish culture is everywhere. From the writer Shalom Aleichem to the local paper, the Birobidzjan Stern, printed in Russian and Yiddish. The region's autonomous status goes back to the 1920s. Long before the creation of Israel, the USSR's Jews demanded their own state. Stalin obliged, but offered them this hitherto uninhabited corner of the Soviet Empire, a no-man's land of bitingly cold winters and mosquito-infested summers. This is the seat of the Birobidzjan government, a state within a state, complete with its own national assembly. This is the only place in Russia where all official documents are translated into Yiddish.
The Jews don't form the majority here, but as we like to joke, you have the right not to be Jewish, but you have to live like one.
Valery Solomonovich Gerevich is a member of the administration. Like many of his colleagues, he's Jewish, but their numbers are dwindling. Here, temperatures of minus 20 Celsius have turned the river Biro to ice, but it's not the cold that's caused the exodus. Once there were some 30,000 Jews in the area. Now that figure stands at between 4,000 and 6,000. Valerie's mother now lives in Israel.
Emigration really took off at the beginning of the 1990s. To Israel, sometimes Germany and the US. Economic conditions were hard. There was a lot of unemployment and production had ground to a halt. People went off in search of a better life. But this is the 4th year in a row where more people have come back than left.
Sitting at the crossroads of Soviet and Jewish history, Birobidzjan has forged its own secular Jewish culture. Here, past communist ideals rub shoulders with Christianity and, of course, Judaism. This synagogue is on the main road, Lenin Street.
We designed this memorial for the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. Every year, those who were deported and who live here gather to remember those who lost their lives at the hands of Hitler.
Birobidzhane's modern synagogue was built just 3 years ago, when the town welcomed a new rabbi from Israel, the first for decades. When he arrived, he was shocked to discover that after 70 years of Soviet atheism, there was nobody left who remembered the prayers.
Arriving in Birobidjan, perhaps some people thought it was a second Israel. At first, even as Israel didn't even exist. Many thought they could live like real Jews, but it wasn't like that at all. From the start, religion just wasn't here. It was all artificial. You know, I'm well aware of Stalin and his character, and nobody can make me believe that he wanted to do something good for the Jews. I don't know if the Jews were physically forced to come here, but morally, there was propaganda saying, here, there's poverty and starvation. You should go there. Things will be better. So morally, people were forced to come here.
All age groups come to the synagogue building. Here, youngsters learn the Hebrew alphabet and the history of Judaism. Three floors below, the older generation talks of relatives who've left for Israel.
I've got nephews over there in Israel.
I've got a niece and a grandson over there.
I've got an aunt, a brother, and a sister.
Hello. How are you all?
Among the oldest, very few can speak Yiddish, but the feeling of being Jewish, even without being religious, is strong. Stalin gave 36,000 square kilometers of land to the Jews, an area bigger than Israel, a vast landscape of forest and rivers. On the face of things, it seems like a good deal. But was Stalin trying to clear Moscow of so-called undesirables? Volkheim, or House in the Woods in Yiddish, is a little village a few kilometers from Birobidzhan. Until a few years ago, it was home to a flourishing collective farm.
Hello, Zaima Mikhailovich. Aren't you freezing?
No, I'm okay.
A few of the region's early settlers set up here in the heart of the forest. As with the kibbutz of Israel, they cleared and cultivated the land with their hands.
It was 1929, and I was 8. There was nothing here, just trees. The first Jews who arrived here were Westerners, sent to the Far East by decree. Those who wanted to signed up and were taken here by the government. The journey was free of charge for us and our belongings. Before coming here, when we lived in the city of Kazan, we practiced religious traditions. But when we arrived here, everything was forgotten. Laws, prayers, we threw them all away. There was no synagogue or anything, and nobody minded.
Как только мы его начали When I started building the block, I advertised. In just a few months, half the apartments had been sold. By the end of the year, there were none left. And there's still 6 months of work left to do.
Here, as across Russia, the economy is booming. And far from becoming a relic, Birobidzhan is being swept up by modernity.
If you look around, there are building sites everywhere. People have money.
Josef Brenner is a Jewish entrepreneur who, like many Russian businessmen, has cashed in on the switch to capitalism.
I built this in brick. Everybody likes it.
Brenner bought up an abandoned factory. Inside, he employs over 100 workers, producing plastics and metals for home building.
This region is looking towards China. It's nearby, so we can import materials easily. A lot of our materials come from China. And we also use Chinese labor. The Jewish region has become a brand. And brands are worth a lot of money. If one day Moscow thinks about abolishing the region, it would be a huge error.
Like everybody here, Josef Brenner's proud of his home and its Jewishness. His 2 children live in Israel. Yet the Jews know that even here they're in the minority. The fall of communism has brought religious freedom to Russia, and Orthodox Christianity is enjoying a revival. In 2007, the church in the region baptized some 4,000 people, almost as many as the total number of Jews who live here.
According to the last census, the Jews represent less than 2% of the region's population. That's not very high. But there's an entrenched Jewish history here. The Jews and the Russians have intermixed. Lots of people here have relatives in Israel. And parishioners quite often ask me for a blessing for their trip to Israel.
Strong links with Israel and a lack of anti-Semitism. Birobidzhan is a Russian exception. 55 years after Stalin's death, the Jewish autonomous region has carved its very own path into the 21st century.
Well, the reporter behind that story, Stanislas de Ippolita, joins me now in the studio. Stanislas, this was really an incredibly isolated part of the world, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it's a long way away from Paris. We flew to Moscow. From Moscow, a domestic flight, 6,000 kilometers, 9-hour flight to Birobidzhan. We arrived in Khabarovsk, a large city of 6,000 inhabitants, and then we took the Trans-Siberian for 300 kilometers to reach there. You have to realize that 10 time zones difference from France or the UK. We're really on the Chinese border, the Amur River there that makes the difference. We're closer to Japan there, to North Korea, than I would say to Western Europe or Moscow. It's a long way away and very, very remote. Stalin showed a place a long way from Moscow for Jews.
Well, like many nations, Russia, of course, has a history of anti-Semitism. Could you at all feel any prejudice towards the Jewish community when you were there?
Well, it's true that anti-Semitism is fairly important in Russia. There were a number of cases that made the headlines, and it's no accident if the Soviet Union really sent a lot of Jews to Israel who emigrated there. We don't sense any anti-Semitism. People say, of course, that the Jews themselves say no anti-Semitism sensed there. But we were able to talk to the representatives of the Orthodox community and other religious communities. It's something they don't feel, perhaps because it's a Jewish state, and even the non-Jews are used to this culture. They have this education, and it's the Far East, and when we talk to people there, they say, well, in the Far East, there are few people. Man feels very insignificant in terms of nature, and they help one another, and no anti-Semitism. They're very proud of that, in fact.
What's fascinating about this is Stalin's role. This is a man, after all, who was known for launching a series of anti-Semitic campaigns during his time in power. So just why do you think that Stalin decided to relegate the Jews to this area? Was he giving them the land, or was there another reason?
Well, clearly Stalin wasn't known for really admiring the Jews. I think it was an act of domestic policy by giving them a homeland, but the fact that the homeland was so far, so remote, suited him. He also wanted to have a settlement with the border with China, which was occupied by Japan before the war, so he needed this settlement there. But after that, there were stronger waves of anti-Semitism between 1947 and 1950. He launched a struggle against cosmopolitanism, and there were many purges, arrests and deportations.
Thank you very much indeed for that fascinating look into Russia. Well, that's all we have time for this week on Reporters. More reporters next time.